Well, hello, First Church. It's good to be with you again today. Several years ago, after my wife and I bought our first home here in Denver, I decided I was tired of our kids' toys cluttering up the living room and the family room and, well, really seemingly every room in the house. And so I determined that it was time for them to have a little space of their own. I decided it was time for us to remodel our basement. Now, I know that there were plenty of well-qualified professionals who could have done this job for me, but as it turns out, I'm a bit, let's say, thrifty or stewardly. And so I decided I was going to save some money and I was going to do the job on my own. Never mind that I don't have any real expertise or even any experience as a builder. I figured I could pull this off because I had two other things going for me. First of all, I had YouTube and all the instructional videos found there. But even better, I figured I had a good handful of friends who I might convince into helping me out and showing me what I needed to know. And as it turned out, that was true. At each phase of my building project, I invited a different friend over, and that friend would take a little time, maybe a few hours, maybe even a few days in some cases, and would kind of show me the ropes for that part of the project. So Matt came over and helped me learn about the basics of framing. Paul showed me a little bit about plumbing. Marv taught me about wiring. My dad showed me how to hang drywall. Jeremy showed up when it was time to install windows and to hang doors. Really, I thought it was a pretty great system, at least for me. But there was just one problem with this little system and this plan as I had conceived it. The problem was that, well, after these men came over to my house and spent some time with me, well, eventually they all left. And when they left, it seemed that my confidence left right along with them. It seemed the moment they walked out the door, I could no longer remember what they had shown me or taught me. The red wire? The black wire? And what was it they said again? Oh, boy. So it seemed that soon after they left, I'd often be kind of left standing there in my basement, maybe holding my wrench or my crowbar or my hammer, whatever it was, but just left standing there feeling, well, fairly overwhelmed and wondering how I was ever going to pull off such a massive project on my own. Well, I tell you that today because I imagine that's a little bit how the disciples must have felt when Jesus speaks to them in John 14. If you back up just a few verses before where our scripture reading began today, you'll see there that Jesus has just told the disciples that he is confident that they are going to do great things. In fact, Jesus not only tells them they're going to do great things, he says they will do even greater things than they've seen him do during the years they've spent with him. Now that's really quite incredible, quite impressive, especially given the disciples' track record with Jesus. But I think maybe what made it difficult for them to hear these words, or especially difficult to hear these words, is that Jesus has also told the disciples that he's about to leave them. And he said his time with them is nearly up, and he's got to go back to his Father's house. Well, John tells us that the disciples are troubled by this news, and I imagine they're troubled for all sorts of reasons. I imagine certainly that they're troubled because they just don't want to say goodbye to their friend, to their rabbi, to their teacher, this man they've come to know and love. But I imagine that the disciples are also troubled because they just can't imagine how life and ministry are going to continue without Jesus there to help them and to guide them. I mean, the disciples, well, they've managed to misunderstand Jesus' words and to make a mess of things, even during the time when he was right there alongside of them, right there kind of looking over their shoulder, coaching them, teaching them, helping them out, showing them how it's supposed to all be done. Right? It was hard enough, even with Jesus right there. So they must be wondering, how is it that Jesus can expect them to do anything worthwhile, never mind anything great, if he's leaving them to do it on their own? See, that's the question that I think lurks just below the surface of John 14. Of course, Jesus' answer to their question, which you just read, is that, well, he doesn't expect them to do it on their own. Verse 18, Jesus says it this way. Jesus says, hey, guys, don't fret. Don't be afraid. Don't give up just yet. He says, because I will not leave you as orphans, but I will come to you. And the implication of the rest of the text is, I will come to you by my Spirit. That's how he says it in verse 18. But actually, you don't even have to read that far in this text to hear Jesus' promise of another helper. Verse 16, Jesus says it this way. He says, yes, I'm leaving. Yes, I'm going back to the Father. But when I get there, he says, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and to be with you forever. So some of you who grew up with other Bible translations might have learned that verse a little bit differently. Maybe the way you learned it, maybe you heard Jesus saying that when he gets back to the Father, he will ask the Father to give another helper, or another comforter, or another counselor. Well, the truth is, all of those words are fine translations of one Greek word that's been notoriously difficult for people to translate. The word is parakleton. Now, what you should know today is that word actually comes from two other Greek words. It comes from the word para, which means alongside of, and kaleo, which means called. So a parakleton, or parakletos, that is one who is called alongside of another. Think about that. One who is called alongside of another. I think that's a beautiful picture of the Spirit's role and work in our own lives. I mean, Jesus, who, remember, walked alongside of the disciples and helped them to learn and live the life of the kingdom for 3 years. Jesus is now saying to them and to us that he's sending another one in his place to come alongside of us in his place and to help us learn and live the life of the kingdom in the same way that he helped his disciples. Or you could picture it this way. Jesus is saying that for us, the Spirit is going to be like that friend who shows up at your house on a Saturday morning when you've bitten off a modeling project that's maybe a bit more than you can chew. And that friend who comes alongside of you and says, hey, let me help you out. Hey, let me show you how that's done. Hey, how about we try it this way instead of that way? Because if you do it that way, it's probably not going to end well. Right? Jesus says the Spirit is like that friend who comes alongside of you and maybe even has to say sometimes, friend, this is a bit much for you. How about you let me take over for now? Right? How about you let me do something with you and maybe even for you that you could never do on your own? See, that's what the Spirit does for us. That's the Spirit's role in our lives, at least one of them. The Spirit helps us comes alongside of us so that we might learn and live the life of Jesus and his kingdom. Right, so it's the Spirit, right? The Spirit who comes alongside of us and says, hey, psst, friend, remember that thing Jesus said about loving each other? Well, how about you don't whack your brother or your sister with that stick right now? How about you don't take that verbal jab at your spouse or at that person on your Zoom call who's really getting on your nerves? Right, let's try things a little bit differently right now. And it's the Spirit who comes to us and who puts that song on our hearts. That's just the thing we need. For me, the last few weeks, it's been, "This is my Father's world." Or the Spirit who helps us call to mind just the right verse at just the right time. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons that reading and even memorizing Scripture is important, because it gives the Spirit a little more raw material to work with. But it's also the Spirit who comes alongside of us and who helps us to do things that we could never do on our own. Now, I don't know how things have been going in your house the last 2 months, but I can tell you that in my house, one of the things we've been learning is, well, just how hard it is to keep Jesus' seemingly simple command, and by the way, the only command he gives in John, to love one another. It's one thing to love your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad or your kids, your spouse. It's one thing to love the people you live with when you only see them, a couple hours a day at most. But it's another thing altogether to try to love people as Jesus loved when you are with them day after day after day after day. Right? That's hard. Right? That's another thing altogether. And frankly, I'm not sure we're up for it in my house, at least not on our own. That's one of the things I've learned the last few weeks. Loving people, even the people you live with, is hard. But of course, it's not just the people that you live with that it can be hard to love. It can be hard in this season to know how to love people you don't live with. A few weeks ago, Pastor Brett and our deacons challenged us all to find ways, creative ways, to demonstrate God's love in our networks and our neighborhoods. They said, just try to think of something. They said, maybe you'll take a cue from the woman in our church who served breakfast burritos to the workers in her grocery store. Or said, maybe you can adopt a nursing home and give some support and encouragement to the staff and to the residents there, maybe people in your neighborhood that way. Or said, maybe just you and your friends, a couple of you could volunteer to go down to your local school and serve grab-and-go lunches to kids. They said, just try to think of something and then just do it. And they said, and if you need funding, we want you to do this so much, we'll even help you pay for it. That's how much they wanted you to do this. So I thought that was a great challenge. I was very excited by the idea of at least. But here's the thing, friends. The thing is, I still haven't stepped up to the challenge. And there's probably all sorts of reasons for that. But I think what it boils down to is this. Frankly, I'm not sure I've got what it takes. I'm not sure I'm up for it right now. And so I haven't even tried. And I tell you that today because I think so often, that's the temptation of the Christian that we face as Christians. There are these times when we sense God calling us maybe into something that requires a little bit more than we have. Maybe a lot more than we have. And so the temptation is to quit even before we start, because we just aren't sure we have what it takes. I understand that temptation. But friends, here's the thing I'd invite you to think about today, to wonder about. Think about this. How might you approach these situations differently if you knew and believed that Jesus was standing right there beside you, ready to help you? And how might you do it differently if you knew that Jesus was standing right there beside you, ready to help you? That's an important question, I think, because, well, according to John 14, he is. He is. Jesus says in John 14, Jesus says that he has indeed come to us by his Spirit. Right? He has come to us. He has come alongside of us by His Spirit so that He might help us, so that He might give us all that we need to live the abundant life that He desires for us. And one Saturday morning, those years ago when I was working in remodeling my basement, one of my friends had come over. He'd shown me how to do the day's tasks, and then he'd announced that it was time for him to go back home. He had his own tasks and projects to work on, I guess. So he was getting ready to leave, but before he got in his truck and he drove away, he said this to me. He said, Joel, if you're unstuck, he said, just give me a shout. I'm only a phone call away. Well, friends, the good news for us today is that Christ, by His Spirit, is not even a phone call away. He's closer than a phone call, closer than a prayer, closer even than your next breath. Because Christ, by His Spirit, is with you. He lives in you, and He has promised to walk alongside of you. To walk alongside of you and to help you so that you might have all that you need to love and follow Him. Friends, I hope you find that encouraging today and in this week. And I pray that in this week you will be attentive to the Spirit's presence in your midst, that you will see the way He is at work around you, and that you will be eager to join Him there. Grace and peace, dear friends. Have a good week.